What is your opinion of sports team names like the Cleveland Indians or the Civil War rivalry game between Oregon State and U of O, University of Oregon?
Let's put it this way. If this wasn't happening in an era where we're actually pulling down statues of Abraham Lincoln, I would be much more open to the idea that this is something that needs to be addressed, because there's obviously a question, right?
Yeah.
It's obviously, in the case of the Cleveland Indians, it's obviously a caricature, right? And
well, I don't know about I just don't know anything about sports teams, honestly, but I think I can pull into my head the mascot, not the mascot, but like the image of
the icon, and I believe the mascot
is the same.
Person.
Okay, so that's a caricature,
right?
But is the name itself a caricature? Like, wouldn't it be possible to get rid of the thing and like the image and keep the name as an homage, not to the caricature, but to the actual group of people who, did in fact live on this land, right?
Yeah, look, I think there's a discussion to be had. It's not like I don't think there's anything to be talked about, and it's not like I think it's simple. Like the whole thing is obviously it's got to go because the caricature is offensive, which it probably is. Yeah. But
and then this one about the Civil War, I actually ran into a guy months ago now as I was putting my paddleboard in the water, a student at, I can't remember which one of these it was, but he told me about this rivalry game between Oregon State and U of O, and said that it was called the Civil War, and now there was a move to get rid of that naming. And I was thinking about it a little bit more afterwards, like, but that imagines that the only time you invoke Civil War, you're invoking the American Civil War, right? And the American Civil War had, like World War II, there are these occasional wars. You're like, actually, there was a right side. Right? Yeah. There really was an evil, whether or not people living on the ground at the time could or could not see it, but there really was, without that much historical vantage point and ability to be like, yeah, actually, you guys were wrong and you guys were right. And in those two cases, like the right people won. Yep. Not the case for a lot of wars, and not presumably the case for many civil wars. And I just don't know enough about various other civil wars to be able to right now list off a bunch of them. But a civil war just refers to a war between factions within a country. Yep. And this is the two big state schools in the state of Oregon, and the rivalry is called a Civil War. So it's being canceled because it's imagined that one of the schools thinks they're the South? Like, I can't even imagine like what the cancellation reasons are, unless the very words Civil War are simultaneously like ahistorical. It can only mean one Civil War.
Well, I think there is a translation here.
Okay.
I'm not, I do think, I'm open to be convinced that we have this wrong, but I agree with you. Civil War is it's a term of art that describes a certain kind of conflict, and the idea that this is now beyond the pale is absurd. But what I would say is the targeting of these things is very simply a demonstration of power, right?
Yeah.
We have the ability to get you to remove that statue, right?
Well, in the case of the statue, more generally, we're going to do it late at night because we're getting our yayas.
Right, but you won't put it back up. We have the ability. Yeah. We are now the city planners who decide what there will be monuments to in the city. And if that involves us pulling it down in the middle of the night and you not putting it back up, so be it. Mm-hmm. Right. But my basic point is there is a sort of test of how much power a person or a movement has, and the ability to get stuff renamed, right, is just an affirmation of the power.
Yep.
And so I guess that's my point about the Cleveland Indians, is that I think there is a question, but in this context, it's very hard to distinguish it from all of the just demonstrations that, we have the power to cancel George Washington and Abraham Lincoln and all sorts of other things.
And that's part of what entrenching is people just being like, well, not in this context. Like, maybe that's the right thing to do, but me resisting doesn't make me racist. I'm saying there's no way for anyone to know if this is the right move, given the accelerating force behind this movement.
Yeah, right. And so there's also a dimming of the standards. So, for example, if we take the N-word controversy.
Yeah.
My contention is that for decades there was an agreement, an informal social agreement, that you didn't use that word,
Mhm.
right, except in a context
If you
where
weren't black.
it was necessary.
Yeah.
Right. If you were black, you could use it. If you were white, you didn't use the word unless you were reading Huck Finn, you were, singing Bob Dylan or quoting his lyrics. You were using it in a context where it was necessary for some reason, or you were talking etymologically, or you were talking historically, or you were quoting or whatever. And the point is, the idea that it is actually the uttering of the syllables that is the crime rather than the using the term in earnest is obviously absurd.
Well, and this is part of what we've talked before about them saying intent doesn't matter.
Right.
This is pushed to its furthest limit. Intent doesn't matter. I just said, like, what was that professor who said something in Chinese, I think, who it sounded something like the N-word,
Right.
and he gets canceled for it? Like, oh my God, dudes.
Right.
Like, you have totally lost the plot. It was literally two phonemes put together that sounded like a word that is an epithet.
Right, except haven't lost the plot, because the basic point is actually we have the power to make every person parse their speech at the level of syllables, watching out for the danger that they will say something that sounds nearby to something offensive, right?
What do you mean there's a culture of fear?
That's a lot of power, right? So
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.